Okay, so we'll be doing an update on the national survey. So I've brought like the technical competence, and I'll be presenting the process to generate the survey. So actually, what are the three things or four things I want to say is just come back briefly about the survey design process, and then present the survey tool and the administration of the first official wave of the survey, and then some key facts. Of course, it's brand new results that we just got from, I have to say, less than 12 hours ago that were produced, the most recent survey results with the sample we got. And of course, there's much more things we can do with the nice data we got. So the first thing before Samuel talks about the tool is the survey design. So I have to say that it was a long and complex process of designing this national survey for many reasons. Well, first is because we are trying to capture things that we're not currently capturing, else we would not be doing a new survey. And there are a lot of ambitions on things we want to measure. And at the same thing, when we do surveys, of course, we want to have a lot of respondents. So we must be careful about the respondent burden. So it's a trade-offs between what everyone wants to measure. Sometimes it's unclear what we want to measure, but we have ideas of what we want to measure. So this is why actually it's been a long process and with a lot of iteration and feedback with and discussion with a lot of people. So these are the key elements that came and were used to design this wave of the national survey. So it started a long time ago where we had a long discussion with a lot of people on what should we ask and the various perspectives we could address. And so it was brainstorming session. We have a lot of notes on things that we'd like to measure, we'd like to capture, on aspiration, on perceptions, and all these barriers. And so a lot of components, and it was formalized and based on various objects. So the trips, of course, accessibility, the household, the various element that could limit your mobility. And then we had some interaction with the seat. So we proposed them some questions. We had some feedback. It was really rich, really questioning when we had this interaction with the seat on the way we ask questions, on types of questions that we did or not asked. And we asked them to test the pilot. So what you see at the bottom is actually the decision we took to implement a pilot survey using an in-house panel that we have at Polytechnique, in which we had this core survey, but in the middle we had four scenarios, so four sets of questions where we were testing various ways to ask questions on the perception and aspirations and all these elements. And then we compared, because one of the tasks of the survey design team is to make sure that the burden is kept low, so we can actually have a good response rate and a high completion rate. So we've analyzed how the respondent interacted with the tool, and we looked at the dropout rates, what kind of questions seemed like increasing the burden and inviting people to just drop the survey. And you have to know that in this in-house panel, there's no incentives. So people are just assisting, and what they were accepting to do is to help us design the national survey. So they knew that we were trying to find a good combination of questions, but they were faced with one of the scenarios. So we had a question also where we wanted to address how complex they felt the survey was. And this is something we are adding in all the survey we design. So this panel survey, not panel, but pilot survey, allowed us to look into the difference in the way people answered to this set of questions. And we identified questions that were too long, too burdening, and there was not a direct relation between duration and response rate. So it was a combination of complexity, burdening questions, and then we generated a final set of questions to launch first wave up the national survey. But first, I will ask Samuel to discuss a bit about the survey tool before I go in the preliminary results.
So yeah, hi everyone. I'm a research professional for the mobility chair. I was also the main web developer for Mobilizing Justice survey, and I'm just really happy to present today. So first, I will explain the survey tool that we use for Mobilizing Justice. So there was many challenge with mobilizing justice. So one of them was the complexity of the survey. Of course, we cannot use SurveyMonkey for an origin destination survey as we need to capture the location of the respondent and all the information of the household members. And also, it's essential to minimize the burden on responders to ensure a high completion rate across all regions of Canada. Um, Also, mobilizing justice, we need to support multilingual because it's available in all Canada. So we need to make sure that all the official language, like English and French, was good. And one of the main challenges with this survey was the accessibility for people with disabilities. So we aim to ensure that every Canadian citizen can participate in the survey. So it must be designed to accommodate respondents with disabilities. And one of the last challenges that we had was the result validation. So it is crucial to validate each survey response during the survey and after the survey to make sure that we have quality data. So you can change. Yeah. So one of the solution was to use Evolution. So it's a software for developing survey questionnaire on mobility that we develop with mobility teachers. So it's open source, everyone can use it. It was a good tool to address every challenge that we have with mobilizing justice and other origin destination survey. So right now you can see a screenshot showing when we request the home address of the respondent. So you can continue. So I'm going to show you two examples of the question from our survey. So the first example was when we asked the respondent how many time a week you go to an unusual place for with the following mode of transport, which in this case was walking or wheeling. So that was a question really interesting because we usually only focus on walking during our survey, but for this survey it was really important to include data from respondents who also use wheelchairs. The second example is a range input question. So the question was, how do you feel? Do you feel very safe or not safe at all from road accident when traveling? So it's an effective way to capture the dimension of exposure to externalities that Catherine's gonna present after. So yeah. So we have four main feature with evolution. So one of the main feature is the ability to create dynamic survey that only ask relevant questions to respondents, helping to reduce their burden. So for example, if a respondent is from a rural region and they don't have access to public transportation, we don't want to ask every question about public transportation to reduce the burden. Also, evaluation is good for geolocation integration. We can easily incorporate location question into the survey. So, for example, we can ask about the home address or the usual visited place, and it's very easy to do. And also during the pilot survey, we test the survey with responder with disabilities, and it helped us to improve his interface and accessibility to make sure that everyone can respond to the survey. Like I said before, one of the challenge was the multilingual support. So right now the survey it's in French and English, but it's gonna be really easy if in future survey wave we want to add additional language, for example, Hindi or Spanish. We can do that right now. And you can continue. And the last feature that we need was the analytic feature. Because we must ensure that we can analyze the result with robust feature. So one of the feature we need was to validate the result. So with evaluation, we can validate each survey result to make sure that we collect high quality, reliable data. We also have create advances tool for data analysts. It'll help us to get valuable insight from the data by using different statistical method and visualization that we're gonna present our preliminary result. Also, one of the invaluable feature was the live monitoring, as it allows us to track progress and engagement instantly, ensuring that everything is running smoothly and enabling us to react quickly to any issue that may arise. So yeah.
Thank you, Samuel. And I have to say, Samuel was very busy monitoring the survey while it's been conducted. So so the survey has just been closed. Well, almost or whatever. It's soon. So we have a lot of observations. And I have some facts regarding the first wave. So I call it the first wave. Probably there's an underlying assumption that there may be other waves. So that's something that we will need to be discussing. And so currently it's not fully validated. So the tool is making some validation, but we still need to check some other things, because if we are very restrictive with what people enter, then of course we have the risk of increasing the dropout rate. So it's also a trade-off between, do we want to make people to check for a lot of things while they're filling the survey. So currently, the numbers I have is around 26,000 completed questionnaires. It's distributed across Canada. So of course, it's not simple to do a map of Canada, because it's not, everyone lives south. So, and we have points distributed everywhere. So on the Camembert, the pie chart, sorry, I was looking for the English word of this cheese pie, as we call it in French. You see a lot of respondents from Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and then from other places. So it was well distributed, and that's because we had some quotas to fill using the Léger panel and their partners. So when we look at the sample composition, so you see on the left, it's the distribution based on household ownership and household size. So it's the combination of both. So we see that we have households with no car, so it can allow us to see where is the dominant type of household. So of course you have these single and two people household with 0 or 1 car, and of course it's something that we're expecting. Then when we look at the income range, and for the 4 results I'll be presenting after, I've used this cutoff point. So looking at the distribution of some values for the what we call the high income range, so 60K and over, but we'll have to do more precise segmentation for further analysis, and then the less than 60, and those where we didn't get the answer, and it's actually not that high. And then you have the age distribution of respondents. So this is just the age of the one that we call the respondent, because we have the household structure. So it's just to give an overview of the composition of the whole sample that we have right now. And then I will be presenting 5 actually distribution of values. So as part of the questionnaire, we included questions directly targeting the dimensions of transport poverty. So the mobility dimension, accessibility, affordability, exposure to externalities, and some general question with respect to the self-assessment of the quality, I would have to say, of the mobility conditions. So what is in red? I'm going to show you the distribution. So in the survey tool, as Samuel was presenting, when we do sliders, we have a continuous value. So the default value is -10. So someone has to proactively activate the slider, and then we get an answer which will be distributed between 0 and 100. So if I look at one of the questions where we were addressing the mobility dimension of transport poverty, so one of the questions we asked was, so based on if you think about your typical conditions and travel activity, so to answer to this question, I travel fewer or more kilometers than I would like. And then you have these 2 segments. Of course, it's not weighted. Everything here is just raw sample. and it's for all the anywhere across Canada that was surveyed. So if you were saying I'm traveling fewer kilometers, then were more towards 0, and if you were saying I am traveling more, then you were towards the 100. So we see some difference. Of course, we'll have to do much more complex analysis, but I wanted to see if we were capturing some things and if there was hope to see differences in the way people perceive their mobility. So you see that there seems to be a higher share of people would travel fewer kilometers if you're under 60K, and more or less a difference, but it's less obvious for the higher range of values. If we look into the accessibility dimensions, I just have 5 similar graphs where we just compare the distribution of values. So there seems to be fewer differences with respect to the transport options, and of course, in this case, we'll have to check the spatial component, because probably what will be more significant in the availability of transport options is probably where you live. So this is something we'll have to check, and this is in the next step I'll be discussing in 1 minute. In the affordability dimension, then one of the question was, I own fewer or more cars, and this is actually interesting because it's more concentrated in the middle. So it doesn't seem to be something which is necessarily differentiated by income. We see a small difference, and we'll have to analyze further. But also, this is probably really linked to where people live, because if you own cars, it's related to the fact that you have probably less transport options. If we look into the exposure to externality, so one of the questions we were asking is the concept of being safe from crime and harassment while traveling. So we see that it's much more distributed across the full range of values. So it's not fully concentrated between 40 and 60, something we see for some questions. And then we have differences from the not safe and the very safe. Very safe was at the 100, and big difference for the high income, where we have a higher proportion of people who said I feel very safe. So in the really high values. And then the overall satisfaction. So you're asking people to compare themselves with the rest of with the others. So it's really the perception. So I feel that my overall travel conditions are worse or better than others. And then you see some differences, but of course, this is just a glimpse, because we need to do statistical analysis and weight the data, and of course, account for all the demographic and spatial location. But this is the first thing that we wanted to see, whether these kind of questions would be able to capture some things, or if we would just capture these 40 to 60 values and there would be no discrimination. So we have plenty of do with this kind of data. So the next step, of course, there were some validations, but we will need to check more, namely the logic with the spatial locations and the interdependency between how people answer with all these range and these scales. We have to check about the representativeness of the sample, probably work on the sets of weights if possible, and the concept of what spatial aggregation to use is not that obvious, because for some area we will have fewer observations. So there's this idea of developing typologies of neighborhoods and trying to segment and weight based on these types of neighborhoods that would account for transport options availability and other features that have an impact on transport behaviors. And so these are the things we'll be working on. And of course, there's so much to do with the data. And I should have added here, we have to discuss whether, now that we have a tool, now that we have a set of questions and we'll be able to assess their values, should we move to a second wave using other types of recruitment strategies? But that's something that we will probably have time to discuss further. So voila, and I think we're ready for questions. And I haven't checked the chat, but I see there are some. I wonder if I should stop the share, because I know Samuel has additional slides if there are some questions, but let's see what's on the chat. Or I don't know. Not seeing the slides. Were you seeing the slides?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, phew.
But it was in
Okay.
presenter view. Just kidding. That was me. Okay, so yeah, there are some questions here, Catherine.
Yep.
Karina, I asked a question. I tried to answer, but what are your thoughts on like the version of the data that might become publicly available?
So my view on this, well, of
Mhm.
course, if you are aware of how the microdata from StatScans are distributed, they have no spatial information of any type. So maybe if we work on a typology, that would be a way to make sure that if the typology is based on features of the surrounding, then I think that would be an easy way to link to some sort of context and be able to provide microdata. Else, of course, it has to be aggregated. But I mean, depending on what people are wanting to do, there's probably a few things we can pre-estimate and then provide this in terms of what's available in the surrounding, and then you less need the specific context. Else, we have to remove everything that allows someone to be identified, of course.
Yeah, and maybe Daniel, Dan Fuller, do you want to unmute if you can, and you can tell us a bit about these neighborhood typologies that you want to recommend?
I'm not hearing. I'm not sure.
No, I'm not sure he's here to ask. He's recommending something called, oh,
Can't
I thought
unmute.
he can't
Oh,
unmute.
What
Okay.
I can maybe allow people to unmute. I'm not sure if Catherine and Samuel would like that.
Yeah.
Do you wanna do
Yeah, I think at this point, let's do that so that people can.
that? Okay. Just give me a moment. All right, go ahead. You can unmute now. Daniel, if you would like to unmute, you're able to now.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it says you should be able to, but okay, sorry. Let's we'll continue to figure this out. But other questions about the survey at this time?
One thing we may mention is that, well, Samuel has gathered some comments that we received from those who participated in the survey, and there were quite interesting comments about the feedback to on the interest of the survey, the fact that it was engaging, it was well structured, fun survey, and so yeah, I think it's a topic that people enjoyed. For those who actually did the survey seriously, it's something that they felt was an important topic. So, yeah. So,
Okay, so a couple of questions before
yeah.
maybe Sherwood's I think is easier. What's the target number of completions and what's the target deadline for that?
So you have the quotas. No, Samuel, you're sending updates on quotas, and I'm not always
Yeah,
reading you.
I don't have the number in front of me, but I think we're really close to the completion. So maybe we have 95% of the result. It's just that the last 5% it's more difficult to get because it's from region that was harder to get. And also we need to make sure that we have at least 30% of lower household member income. So yeah. And yet, like Steven said, the target it's about 29,000 people right now.
So
Okay,
the duration, we haven't checked. I'm sorry, I was looking at question. The survey duration, I didn't check that yet.
but it was designed to be 20 minutes long, I believe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a distribution around 20 minutes of how long the survey takes.
So 20 to 25. The scenarios we tested were all between these. Median duration was 10 to 24 minutes. So, but we've added these direct question about the transport poverty dimensions.
So I think we have a question from Alex.
Hey, thanks, Catherine and Samuel. It's exciting to see some of the early results. I had a question about just trying to see if you all have thought of this, but I was looking at the dimensions of transport poverty questions that you asked. And just to take one, for example, you've got a question about, I own fewer or more cars than I would like to, and there are some that are similar, but I'm just thinking about people who might have responded. You could imagine like a wealthy person responding and saying like, oh, I own fewer cars than I would like to. I have 2, but I would like to have 3, or I have 3, but I would like to have 4. And so I wonder if you've thought about how you'll actually differentiate folks who are in that situation relative to folks that are actually experiencing deprivation, disadvantage, and poverty. So yeah, just think about how you're going to actually analyze these results to make sure that you're actually capturing people in need and not mixing in people that have expensive tastes.
We have the full description of the household composition. So household with how many people own the driving licenses, and we have car ownership. So that's something we can control. So usually we will look into the car to driving license ratio to see whether the household is in a situation where every driver has a car or not. So that's something we can control for. So we have a lot of, so I didn't present any elements regarding the 4 first sections of the survey where we ask about home location, dwelling feature, car ownership, and the household members features, respondent profile, and the trip and activities. But these are all control variable to allow to make some analysis for various types of individual, household, and neighborhoods.
So we have a last question about what was the platform or advertising method that we use for this wave? So Catherine, you want to respond for that?
Well, since 2010, we started to develop a tool to make a travel survey because we had a request from our university to help in the administration of a mobility survey. So we started to develop this, and well, it's been used in the 2 more recent urgent destination surveys in the Quebec province, so Montreal and Quebec, with more than 150,000 households. So it's called Evolution.
I think the question was more about the advertise method, so with Léger Panel.
Well,
So
that's
if you don't mind,
yeah.
Hisham, let's take the question offline to the chat, and I'm happy to answer you there because I just want to keep us on time and on schedule. So thanks so much, Catherine.